Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're diving into the Kanban method, something that's been making waves in all sorts of fields. We're going beyond the buzz, though, to really understand why this method for managing knowledge work is so impactful. And for this deep dive, we're using the official Kanban guide.
It's a fantastic resource for really getting to grips with how Kanban works.
One thing that really caught my attention is that focus on flow.
Mm.
Instead of just making sure everyone's busy all the time, it reminds me of rush hour. Everyone's on the road, but is anyone really getting anywhere fast?
That's a spot-on analogy. With Kanban, it's about avoiding those workflow traffic jams, right?
Yeah.
So instead of just measuring how busy people are, you're looking at whether work is actually moving through the system, getting completed.
So it's more about the results than just checking off tasks.
Exactly. And that leads us to another interesting concept.
Yeah.
Pulling work rather than pushing it. So instead of, scheduling tasks based on a rigid plan, you only start new work when there's the capacity to handle it.
It sounds like that could really help teams avoid getting overloaded and create a more sustainable pace.
Absolutely. Now, before we go any further, let's clear up what Kanban actually is and what it is in T.
Okay, I'm ready to bust some myths.
Kanban is a method, not a strict methodology or a rigid framework.
So it's more about the principles and practices you can apply to your existing processes.
Precisely. Think of it as fine-tuning your engine, for better performance, not swapping it out for a completely new one. Speaking of engines, the Kanban guide uses a really clever analogy to explain this, the Autobahn.
Oh, I do love a good analogy. Tell me more.
Okay, so picture a packed Autobahn. Lots of cars, high utilization, right? But if there's a massive traffic jam, those cars aren't getting to their destinations quickly. So low throughput. Kanban is about optimizing that throughput, ensuring things are moving smoothly through the system.
It's not just about having everyone busy, it's about them actually being productive.
Exactly. And just like different vehicles on the Autobahn represent different types of work, Kanban recognizes that not all tasks are created equal.
So, like, a semi-truck hauling a huge load might be a big, complex project, while a motorcycle zipping around might be a smaller, quicker task.
Yeah, that's it. And you see those emergency lanes, carpool lanes,
Yeah.
prioritizing certain vehicles, right?
Yeah.
Well, Kanban does the same thing with what they call classes of service. So certain work items get prioritized based on how urgent they are or their value to the project.
Makes sense. Now let's dig into the principles behind the Kanban method. The guide breaks it down into two categories: change management and service delivery principles.
They're a great starting point for understanding how Kanban creates a framework for, positive change and delivering real value.
One thing that jumped out at me in the change management section is that Kanban isn't about some huge radical overhaul. It starts with what you're already doing, focusing on gradual improvement.
Absolutely. And it really emphasizes that improvement is a collaborative effort. It's not the boss dictating changes from the top. It's the entire team, agreeing to pursue improvement together.
Which makes sense. Often the people doing the work are the ones who know how to make it better.
Exactly. Kanban recognizes that and actually encourages leadership at all levels. So anyone can, spot areas where things could be improved and suggest those changes. Now let's shift gears to the service delivery principles. They really seem to focus on ensuring you're meeting the needs of your customer, whoever that might be, for the work you're doing.
That's a great point. So often we get caught up in just doing the work, we forget who we're doing it for.
Right. And Kanban at its core is all about delivering value to your customers. It's not just churning out work for the sake of it. It's making sure that work is meaningful, that it's useful. And that means understanding your customers, what their needs are, making sure your workflow is aligned with those goals.
So that first principle is all about understanding and focusing on those customer needs. What about the other service delivery principles?
Well, we've already touched on another one, managing the work, not the workers. So instead of micromanaging individual tasks, how people are doing them, Kanban empowers teams to figure out, the best way to get things done.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, no one likes to be micromanaged, and trusting your team, letting them do their jobs, seems like it would boost morale too.
Absolutely. And the final principle emphasizes that Kanban is all about continuous improvement. You don't just set it up and forget it. It's about regularly reviewing the system, the policies you've established, to make sure you're constantly optimizing, that workflow to deliver the best possible value.
So Kanban is all about adapting and evolving.
Exactly. Now that we've covered those principles, let's move on to the practices that bring them to life.
Okay, I'm ready to get into the nitty-gritty. What are some of those key practices that really make Kanban work?
The guide highlights 6 general practices that really capture the essence of Kanban. Visualize, limit work in progress, manage flow, make policies explicit, implement feedback loops, and improve collaboratively, evolve experimentally.
Wow, that's quite a list. I'm particularly intrigued by visualize. I think a lot of people, when they hear Kanban, immediately think of Kanban boards.
You're right. Kanban boards are central to visualizing your work. They give you that clear visual representation of your entire workflow so you can see what's happening, at a glance.
It's like having a roadmap for your project where everyone can see where things are and where they're going.
Exactly. And that visual representation can be incredibly powerful. For example, the guide talks about an in-house training provider who uses a Kanban board. They use colored notes, columns, and lanes to represent different types of work, like whether a training is online or in person.
So you can immediately see what type of training is being developed and where it is in the process. That's a great example.
Yeah, and it highlights how Kanban boards can be customized, to fit any type of work. Now let's talk about another key practice, limit work in progress, or WIP. Now, this might seem counterintuitive at first. Wouldn't doing more at once lead to faster results?
Yeah, it seems like multitasking would be more efficient, but I have a feeling that's not the case.
You're right to be skeptical. Think back to that Autobahn analogy.
Right.
If too many cars enter the highway at once, what happens? Everything slows to a crawl, right? The same thing happens with knowledge work. Limiting WIP is actually crucial for reducing delays, preventing everyone from constantly switching between tasks, and ultimately improving the flow of work.
So it's like having on-ramps to the Autobahn. You don't want to let everyone on at once or it'll cause a massive traffic jam. You need to regulate the flow to keep things moving smoothly.
That's a great way to put it. Limiting WIP is like that ramp metering, making
Yeah.
sure that work is only started when there's space to handle it. That way you avoid bottlenecks and create a more sustainable pace for everyone.
So it's not just about starting tasks, it's about actually completing them.
Exactly. And this brings us back to that idea of pulling work. Instead of work being pushed onto the team based on some rigid schedule, new work is only pulled in when there's capacity, just like cars smoothly entering the highway when there's space.
Okay, that's making a lot of sense. I'm seeing how all these pieces fit together.
You're getting it. Now, remember that example with the training provider and their Kanban board? Well, they use WIP limits for the number of courses they are piloting at one time.
So instead of having a bunch of half-finished courses in development, they focus on completing a smaller number at a time.
Exactly. It helps them keep things moving smoothly. Okay, let's shift gears to another practice. Make policies explicit. Sounds pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah, I'm guessing it's all about having clear guidelines for how work gets done, kind of like a set of rules for the road for our Autobahn.
You got it. Imagine a new person joins your team. Clearly defined policies help them get up to speed quickly. This includes things like when and how to add new work to the board, how to decide what to work on next, how to handle different types of work, even when you hold meetings.
So it creates consistency, makes sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that those policies aren't set in stone. They should be developed collaboratively and be flexible enough to, evolve as the team learns and grows.
Okay, so far we've talked about visualizing the work, limiting WIP, and making the rules of the road clear. What's next?
Let's talk about implement feedback loops. This one is crucial for making sure you're on the right track, for driving that continuous improvement we talked about earlier. Think about it this way. Those traffic information boards on the Autobahn, right? They're feedback loops, providing drivers with insights into traffic conditions and helping them make decisions.
Yeah, they let you see what's coming up, maybe choose a different route if there's a problem.
Exactly. Kanban uses similar feedback loops to provide insights into how work is flowing.
So the Kanban board itself is actually a feedback loop.
Yes. Just by looking at it, you can see where work is piling up, which tasks are taking longer than expected, where there might be bottlenecks. But there are other types of feedback loops too. Metrics like lead time, delivery rate, WAP levels, they give you concrete data to track progress, identify areas for improvement, make informed decisions.
It's like using data to, fine-tune your engine for optimal performance.
Exactly. And then, of course, you have those regular meetings like daily stand-ups, team retrospectives, where you reflect on what went well, what could be improved, replenishment meetings to discuss adding new work to the board, and service delivery reviews to assess, how well you're meeting those customer needs.
So those meetings are like taking your car in for regular maintenance.
Great analogy. Now, Are you ready to tackle those final two general practices? Improve collaboratively and evolve experimentally.
Bring it on. They sound like they go hand in hand.
They do. Remember, Kanban isn't a one-time fix. It's an ongoing process of experimentation and adaptation. And it's done collaboratively. The whole team should be involved in identifying opportunities, brainstorming solutions, testing new approaches to, improve their workflow.
It's a continuous cycle of tweaking and refining.
Exactly. And that improvement should be driven by data. The guide emphasizes using those feedback loops we talked about, along with designed experiments, to test hypotheses and refine your workflow over time.
So it's about being scientific in our approach, constantly testing and iterating based on the feedback we're getting.
You got it. Now that we've covered those 6 general practices, let's move on to some more specific Kanban practices that can really enhance your workflow.
Okay, I'm ready to hear about those specific practices. The guide goes into detail about a few things like static, Kanban boards, WIP limits and pull, core Kanban metrics, and Kanban cadences. Let's break them down.
Sounds good. Let's start with static. It stands for Systems Thinking Approach to Introducing Kanban.
I'm guessing that means it's not as simple as just, putting up a whiteboard and sticking some notes to it.
You're right. It's more strategic than that. Static provides like a step-by-step approach to introducing Kanban, so you can be really thoughtful about, how you're setting it up.
So it's like having a blueprint for building your Kanban system. That makes a lot of sense.
Exactly. Static emphasizes looking at the entire system of work, not just individual parts, and the guide outlines 6 steps to make that happen.
What are those steps?
Well, first, you identify, the sources of dissatisfaction in your current workflow. What's not working?
I like that you start there. Acknowledging those pain points seems like a good way to get buy-in from the team, Create a shared motivation for change.
Absolutely. Once you've got a handle on the challenges, you move on to analyzing the demand, so how much work is coming in, what types, and then the capabilities of your current system.
So you're gathering the data to understand how work is currently flowing.
Exactly. That data helps you see the big picture, so you can create a system that's really tailored to your needs. Next, you model the workflow, basically mapping out all the steps involved in getting work done, from start to finish.
Makes sense. You need to understand the journey before you can create the map, right?
Right. And once you have that map, you identify classes of service. We touched on this earlier. It's how you prioritize work, based on urgency or value, like those special lanes on the Autobahn.
Okay, that's starting to paint a really clear picture. So you've identified the problems, analyzed the workload, mapped the process, and figured out how to prioritize different types of work. What's next?
So then you take all of those insights and use them to actually design your Kanban system. Yeah. So your board, the cards, the policies, the metrics, the whole shebang.
So it's a very comprehensive approach. It sounds like the goal is to really set your team up for success.
Exactly. Now that we've talked about how to introduce Kanban, let's dive a little deeper into those Kanban boards. They really are, the visual heart of this system, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. They give everyone such a clear picture of the workflow. It's so much easier than trying to keep track of everything in your head or using spreadsheets.
Right. The guide actually defines them as a visual display of cards that represent the work items in a Kanban system, typically arranged in vertical columns that represent activities.
Okay, so the columns are the different stages of the workflow, and the cards represent those individual work items.
Exactly. Each card includes information about the task, who's responsible, its status, so you can see at a glance where everything stands.
I bet that helps keep everyone on track and minimizes those status update meetings everyone dreads.
You're catching on quickly. The guide also talks about horizontal swim lanes. These are a way to further enhance the board by separating different types of work or projects.
So it's like an extra layer of organization, kind of like how, lanes on the highway keep traffic moving in the same direction.
Great analogy. And that brings us back to our training provider example. Remember how they used colored notes, columns, and lanes to represent different types of courses on their board? That's a perfect example of how a Kanban board can be customized to meet your specific needs.
You can really make it your own. Okay, let's revisit those WIP limits. We talked about them earlier in the general practices, but I'm sensing they play a pretty important role.
You're right. They're a crucial part of making Kanban work effectively. Remember, it's all about preventing those workflow traffic jams.
And the guide gives a pretty specific definition. The maximum number of work items allowed at a time, which can be defined per work state, per person, per lane, per type of work, or even for the entire Kanban system.
It's like setting a speed limit. Might seem restrictive at first, but ultimately helps everyone reach their destination, safely and efficiently. And remember, WIP limits are key to making that pull system work.
Right. By limiting how much work is in progress, you make sure that new work is only started when there's actually capacity. It's like making sure there's enough space on the Autobahn before letting more cars enter.
Exactly. You're becoming quite the Kanban expert. Now, how about we talk about, how you measure whether or not your Kanban system is actually working?
Let's talk metrics. Everyone loves a good dashboard. It's how you know if you're actually making progress, right?
You got it. The guide highlights 3 core Kanban metrics. Yeah. Lead time, delivery rate, and WIP.
Okay, let's break those down. Lead time. Is that like how long it takes for a package to arrive after you order it online?
Yes. In Kanban, it's the amount of time it takes for a work item to move through the entire system. From start to finish, it's a good measure of how quickly you are delivering value to your customer.
Got it. So what about delivery rate?
Delivery rate, also called throughput, is the number of work items completed per unit of time. Think of it as a measure of your team's productivity. How much are you getting done?
Okay, and WIP we've already talked about. It's just how much work is currently in progress.
Right. These 3 metrics, when you look at them together, give you a really good picture of, how your Kanban system is performing.
I can see how they could help you pinpoint bottlenecks, areas where you might need to adjust things.
Exactly. And you can track those metrics over time using different types of charts and graphs to see trends, make sure you're on the right track.
Now, what about those Kanban cadences you mentioned? Are these like regular team meetings?
Yes. Think of them as the regular checkups you get at the doctor's office to make sure everything is running smoothly. These cadences are all about creating those feedback loops for continuous improvement.
It seems like that's baked into every part of Kanban, constantly checking in and adjusting.
You got it. And remember, those regular meetings should be tailored to the team and their needs.
So no need to create meetings just for the sake of it.
Exactly. Some common Kanban cadences include daily stand-up meetings, team retrospectives where you reflect on what went well and what could be improved, replenishment meetings to discuss adding new work to the board, and service delivery reviews to assess how well, you're meeting those customer needs we talked about.
It sounds like these cadences are like the pit stops in a Formula One race, a chance to refuel, change tires, make adjustments so the car can keep performing at its best.
That's another great analogy. You're really getting the hang of this. We've covered a lot of ground here today, from those specific practices like static and Kanban boards to those core metrics and cadences. We've really explored the ins and outs of Kanban. But I think it's time to bring it all home and talk about what this means for our listener and their work.
So we've spent this deep dive really exploring those like nuts and bolts of Kanban, the principles, the practices, the whole kit and caboodle. But the real question is, how can all of this actually help you, our listener? To make work life better, what are the real world benefits?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
It's what everyone wants to know when they first hear about Kanban.
So let's cut to the chase. What are the highlights? How can Kanban actually make a difference?
Well, I'd say first and foremost, Kanban is about improving flow. Remember that traffic analogy? Yeah, Kanban helps you avoid those workflow traffic jams. By visualizing your work, limiting how much is in progress, and using those pull systems, things move smoothly.
So no more feeling like you're constantly treading water, just trying to keep up with this endless stream of tasks.
Exactly. Kanban helps you prioritize, focus on the work that truly matters, and get things done more efficiently, which, leads to less stress and increased productivity.
That sounds like a win-win to me. Less stress and get more done. Who wouldn't want that?
It's like the difference between navigating rush hour traffic and cruising down an open highway. You relax, enjoy the ride, and actually get where you need to go.
I love that. We've talked a lot about efficiency, but doesn't Kanban also encourage that continuous improvement? It seems like a benefit that goes beyond just getting things done faster.
You're absolutely right. Kanban isn't just about speed. It's about constantly getting better, right? By using those feedback loops, making decisions based on data, teams can really pinpoint areas for improvement and, make small changes that lead to big results over time.
So it's a system that helps you work smarter, not just harder.
Exactly. It's about fostering that culture of, continuous learning and adaptation, always striving to do things better. Now, I know what some of our listeners might be thinking. This all sounds great, but my work is different. How can I use Kanban when my job isn't like, a factory assembly line?
That's a fair point. It's easy to picture a Kanban for a very structured process, but what about for those of us who have, more unpredictable workflows?
Well, the beauty of Kanban is that it's incredibly adaptable. It's not one size fits all. The Kanban guide actually gives examples of it being used in everything from software development and marketing to HR and education, even things like media and design services, customer support, product development teams.
So really, no matter what kind of knowledge work you do, there's probably a way to make Kanban work for you.
Exactly. You tailor it to your specific needs and context. Remember those principles we talked about: visualization, limiting WIP, continuous feedback. You can apply those to almost any type of work. And my advice, start small. Focus on a single project or even just one team, and then, gradually expand from there.
So dip your toes in the water, see how it feels.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to experiment. Adjust as you go. The most important thing is finding what works best for you and your team.
Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've gone from demystifying what Kanban is to understanding those core principles to really exploring the practices that make it work. Any final thoughts for our listeners, as they consider taking this Kanban journey?
I'd encourage them to really picture what a Kanban board for their own work would look like. What might surprise them? What would it reveal about their current workflow? How could visualizing it with Kanban lead to those positive changes? Those are the questions I would leave them to ponder.
Those are great questions to consider. Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into Kanban. Until next time, happy flowing.